Hey everyone, Jonathan Crow here, Director of Community at NinjaOne. And wow, I'm happy to see, very pleased to see John North here, our VP of Enterprise Architecture and Partner Enablement. John, thank you so much for taking time to join us.
Cool. Thanks, Jonathan. Lovely to be here. Yeah, love doing these shows. How you doing? You all
Uh,
right?
I always love getting convincing John to come on board. And give me 1 second. I'm an amateur and I've got YouTube open. And here we go.
Okay.
All right, there we go. Sorry, guys. All right, so John, good to see you. John is, for those who don't know, has been active in the MSP world for a long time. He was with Datto prior to joining Ninja. We're very lucky to have him, and he's between trips where he's gallivanting around and showing off automation tricks and scripting tricks there in the UK and in Europe. We're going to get him over to the US one of these days. He's also been very busy helping out building up the academy. And so, for those of you who are watching, maybe you checked out the NinjaOne Academy and you've gotten certified, or you've helped your team members do that. If you're not familiar with it, we've got links for you and everything. And yes, Andy, you have picked up on what I was asking John about too, about the consoles in the background. I was very interested in it. John, I don't know if you want to go ahead and get out of the way. We're not going to be able to focus unless we address this first. So we should probably get that out of the way first.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So I bought an arcade cabinet many years ago, in 2008, 2009 time, and pulled the guts out of it and put a PC in there running an application called MAME. MAME stands for Multi Arcade Machine Emulator. And what it is if you go back to the old arcade machines from the 70s and 80s, like Pac-Man, Space Invaders, those guys, all based on identical hardware. Okay. The only difference was a chip on the board that controlled the game. Okay. So what they did many years ago, some people much cleverer than me, emulated that hardware with this application. And they got these ROMs, these physical little chips, and put them into EEPROM programmers and pulled the code off. So you can get these little files, there's only like 40, 50K, these little files that contain the original game code from the original games from the 80s and 90s, 70s and 80s. And that's what this thing runs. It runs the original game code in this arcade machine. Then fast forward a few years later, my wife's mum was working in a holiday park that they were closing down. And they had these arcade machines. They're like, look, we can't sell them. No one wants them. Do you want them? I'm like, let me see. Yeah, obviously, yes, right? So it gave me these 4 arcade machines, and I'm doing the same with those as well. So I've got 4 here. I've got one in the garage.
Oh my God. That's incredible. That's the jackpot. I can't. Yes, like I need to start stalking amusement parks that look like they're having risky business. Look like they may be shutting down, so I can squat on there. That's so cool. All right. Well, with that addressed, let's talk about the topic of the day. So, thanks everybody for joining us. We've got some. Want to make the best use of having John captured here, captive. He's here to talk about scripting, not just on one case, like in one-off cases, but building scripting that's really going to work at scale, and how to best leverage the policies and conditions and systems within Ninja to do that. And so he's got some presentation that he's going to be going through, sharing some best practices, tips, and tricks. And as always, please don't be shy. Of course, you don't need much assurance from me. You can be active in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. Share your what you're working on, any challenges you're facing using Ninja, and questions that you have, and we can tee John up with that. But with that, John, I'll go ahead and bring up your screen.
Okay.
And yeah, tell us a little bit about what you're going to cover today.
Awesome, brilliant. Thanks, Jonathan. So hi everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending where you are. Thanks for joining our live stream today on scripting and automation like a ninja. So yeah, my name is John North. I'm now the area VP of Enterprise Architecture and Partner Enablement, as Jonathan mentioned. I've been with Ninja a year and a half now, I think it will take. Just absolutely flown by. While I've been here, I've built the automation specialist course that you may have seen in the academy. As Jonathan said, I've taken ownership of the academy globally now, hence the partner enablement bit. I've also written some stuff for the NinjaOne template library, which is due to be released imminently. Prior to that, I was at another endpoint management company called Tanium, which is more kind of in the enterprise space rather than MSPs. I completely rewrote their custom scripting course, and when I left in 2024, that was the third most registered course in the world. I also wrote some code, a bunch of scripts actually for their product, which now run on tens of millions of endpoints globally. And then, as Jonathan said, prior to that, I was at Datto. On Datto, I remember for about 4.5 years. I joined there, what was Autotask actually, in 2017. Again, I wrote a bunch of courses for them. I wrote some of the code that sits in their script library, and that's running on millions as well. So it's coming on 10 years now, Jonathan, since I started doing this. It's been quite a while. So yeah, that's the reason I'm having this conversation with you today anyway. So I'm going to start at the beginning, obviously, with an introduction, talk about why you might want to use scripts in Ninja and what's available to you. We're then going to look at various different workflows for running automation scripts in Ninja, some of which you'll probably know, some of which you might not. That's kind of the point, to try and chase new stuff. And then I'm going to touch on what we call the credentials exchange, which is how you can create sets of credentials to run your scripts under, apart from just the system account and whoever happens to be logged on at the time. We'll go into conditions and triggering conditions and resolving conditions. So when something bad is happening or when a condition triggers, having that automatically resolve itself with the use of automation scripts. But also using automations to drive conditions. So, you can resolve them with scripts, but you can actually use code to cause them to trigger as well and to interrogate all sorts of things that you might find interesting. For when you're building your own code, some things to think about. Now, I did a live stream last year on this very subject, a whole thing on how to build code. This session is going to be more sort of using it rather than building it. But on the basis you will be building stuff, because you will at some point, I should think, just some very high level kind of things to bear in mind when you're doing that. And then I'll go into the product and show you around what I'm talking about. And then we'll close out with summary and questions. But as Jonathan said, these sessions are interactive. Don't be shy. I don't bite, and I do like answering stuff. So if you've got questions, stick it in the chat, stick it in the question box, and we'll go through as we go. So let's get started. Automation beats manual work, right? Manual work can get really boring, can get really mundane, takes a bunch of time. Scripts generally are faster than people doing stuff, like even something as simple as hopping onto a machine to delete temporary files. Say it's going to be a lot quicker to do it in code than it is to do it yourself. And they're prone to human error. Okay, people do stuff, people make mistakes. That's just how it works. Automation beats repetitive manual work. So it's one thing doing something that's boring once, but doing it over and over and over and over again gets very tedious very quickly. So it'll be a lot better and a lot easier to do something or build something once and then deploy it, at scale. You can deploy the same script to one machine or to 100 or to 1,000 to 10,000 simultaneously in pretty much the same length of time. It also means you've got a standardized approach. If you've got 3 people doing the same thing, you'll get 3 different ways of doing it. But if you've got code doing the same thing, you've got one way of doing it. Okay, so they run much faster. They're completely scalable, right? So what's not to love? This is why Ninja offers you nearly 400 scripts out of the box. Okay, we've got, if you go to the automation library, which I'll be showing you shortly, we've got something like 77 in there. But in the template library, there's over 300 now. We release these on a fairly regular cadence, and there's an awful lot, and it's going to just continue to grow. So you've got all this cool stuff, right? How can you use it? Where can you use it? That's what we're going to talk about now. So workflows regarding automation scripts and the credentials exchange. So who you're going to run them as. I'll start with the ones you're likely to know about. So running stuff on demand ad hoc. Someone calls the service desk, I can't print, I can't send email, my machine's running slow. Usual suspects. You get onto the machine or you find the machine and you deploy a script to it. They say, I can't print, and you send something to restart the print spoiler service. It's like, oh, don't worry, it's fixed now. It's like, oh, you're welcome. It's that kind of thing. You can do that. You can do that from the devices list. And if you do it from there, you can deploy it to one machine or several machines, or use the filters to define a kind of machine and deploy it to all of those, right? Alternatively, at device level, you can go into your device dashboard and run it from there. That's what that second screenshot is. And that's cool, right? That works. But you can only do one script at a time, and you have to do it manually every time, okay? Another way to do this, a more future-proof, if you like, way of doing it, is to not do that, is to have it automated. So within policies, we've got what we call scheduled automations, and they run once or on a recurring basis, like daily, monthly, weekly, every hour, every 20 minutes, whatever. You can also run multiple scripts sequentially. So you can build out this flow of stuff, and it does one thing, then the next, then the next, then the next. You can do that. The problem with the problem, but one of the limitations of that is that because it's policy based, it's tied to organizations and it's tied to device roles. So another way to do that, which is a lot more flexible, is with scheduled tasks. Right, so you've got the same level of scheduling, like forward scheduling or recurring, daily, weekly, monthly, hourly, whatever. But you can also build targets. So you can tell it to go to certain organizations or locations or certain device groups, that kind of thing. And again, you can run them sequentially. So you could get multiple automations and run them, one after the other. So that's the ones you probably know about, but some that you might not have seen. Before and after a backup cycle. So for instance, if you need to stop services running in a certain sequence and then put them back in again in a certain sequence, you could do that. In a backup scenario, certainly make sure that your cloud storage service is switched off. If you're trying to back up your OneDrive folder, say you should be running OneDrive at the time, stuff like that you can do. Pre and post OS patching as well. Again, the usual response here is stopping and starting services in a certain order. There was a really interesting case that I had last year with a customer, and they had, I want to say 2,000 or 3,000, it was that kind of scale, virtual servers sitting on VMware. And what they wanted to do was to snapshot all their servers before they patch. If the snapshot was successful, then run the patching cycle, so that if the patching failed for whatever reason, they could revert back to the snapshot. It was like a multifaceted solution that we came up with. I was really quite pleased with it. So what we did was, prior to the patching window, not the pre-automation execution, but a separate scheduled automation, we wrote a value to a custom field to say something like ready to snapshot, okay, on all these servers. We had a box sitting in the corner somewhere just running this loop in PowerShell to interrogate the Ninja API, to get the list of all the devices, and to get the list of all the devices specifically that had this custom field value. Okay. Once we've got the list of devices that we wanted to snapshot, we'd then cross-reference that against the guests in VMware, and we'd work out which guests corresponded to which devices, and then we'd fire the snapshot. Monitor the snapshot. At the end of the snapshot, then check if it was successful or not. And then if it was successful, we wrote succeeded into the custom field. And if it failed, we wrote failed into the custom field. The pre-automation execution on their patching cycle simply checked the value of the custom field. And if the value of the custom field was anything other than succeeded, it stopped the patch. And they were very, very pleased with that. So, that's quite a deep example, but gives you an idea of the sort of things that you can do, the sort of workflows you can build using Ninja automations.
Thanks, John. And we actually do have a question I'll pipe in with. This is from Ben. He asked, can sequential scripts pass information from the first to second script? If so, how?
That's a really good question. Yes, you can, but not directly. So you couldn't, like, say, create a variable in script A and get that variable value in script B. But what you could do is drop that value somewhere for script B to pick up. So you could drop it into a text file somewhere, you can stick it in a registry value, stick it in a custom field, stick it in a tag, and then have script B pick it up and use it. You could do that way. That's a really cool question.
Cool.
Okay.
Thanks, John.
That's okay. So moving on. The other one is for user-initiated automations from the SysTray icon. So, you can configure the SysTray to do stuff and bring up various different, things for your users to interact with. one of the things you can do is fire automations and fire sequences of automations like you saw in scheduled automations and scheduled tasks. You can have these sequences running. But because the SysTray icon is spawned from the agent running, and the agent always runs the system or root on Mac and Linux, so anything you fire from there also runs as the root account, as the system account. So now you've got a situation where users can do stuff at system level, like installing applications, but without any kind of admin rights or elevation. So they are still completely locked down on what they can do, but they can fire stuff under the system account that you allow them to do. And on that note, the other way to have automations running as someone that isn't either system or the logged in user is what we call the credentials exchange. Now, this is a highly secure, completely encrypted repository for storing credentials. So username and password, standard creds, but also like SNMP creds and SSH telnet creds, that kind of thing. So you set up these credential sets, and then you set which of those credential sets you want to set as default for Mac scripts, Linux scripts, Windows for local admin, and Windows for domain admin. So that means then you can like run a script on a domain controller as the domain admin account, but with no one logged onto it. So that's a really nice way to be able to do stuff like that. Excuse me. So what's next? Conditions. Now, I'm sure you've seen resolving conditions within Ninja with automations, but you may not have seen ways to drive the conditions to fire in the first place. So as a resolve condition, you literally just add the automation on the right-hand side. You can see it there. This is a typical example. If your disk space is less than 10 gig free, then fire an automation to delete temporary files, try and free up some space. Okay, that's a really obvious one. If a service has stopped, try and relaunch it. If a process has stopped, try and restart it. Sorry. If a process is terminated, try and relaunch it. Stuff like that. But the other thing you can do, or one of the other things you can do, is what we call a script result condition, which is exactly what it says on the tin. It's a condition that fires as the result of a script run. So you select your evaluation script, right, which is basically any script you've got in your automation library. Okay, so if you're building random stuff, it could be anything you're interrogating, or any condition you want to try and monitor for, and run it as per any other condition every 10 minutes, every half hour, every minute if you want. But what makes it fire is the combination of the result code and the output message. So if the output is, say, for instance, if the result code is not 0, so generally speaking means it's not successful, then that could make it fire. Or you could have an exit message that says failed or error or unsuccessful, whatever, right? And you can look for that string in the exit message, and that could make it fire. Anything like that you can do. But the other one, and this circles back to that VMware story I told you about, is using custom fields. So you can read and write custom fields in scripts, and then you can use the values of those custom fields, be them, populated by someone or by a script or by the API, to be the condition that triggers, that then runs a potential resolution automation. So you can have a script that writes to a custom field and then have a condition that scoops that up if it's there. These fields are a bit different, actually, depending on which type of custom field you have. So if it's a text custom field, it'll be, does the field value contain this string or not contain this string? If it's a checkbox, is it checked or is it unchecked? If it's an integer, is it greater than, less than X, that kind of thing. So it's very intuitive. So yeah, there's nearly 400 scripts available out of the box, but we can't do everything. There's what was that? There's an infinite number of applications out there and an infinite number of different hardware configurations. We can't do everything on everything. It's impossible. So let's look at things to think about when you're building your own scripts. Now, like I said, I did a live stream on this last year. The recording, I think the recording's on YouTube somewhere. I think, is it Jonathan, presumably? I'd imagine.
Yeah,
so that goes awesome. So that goes a lot deeper into this, but this is just kind of high level to get you started and maybe whet your appetite a little bit. Before we start though, just to circle back on the introduction. So yeah, automation beats manual work. Automation beats repetitive manual work. Scripting often beats manual work, but not always. And scripting at scale usually beats repetitive manual work, but not always. Let me give you an example. So say you've got something non-critical, just irritating, that breaks, I don't know, 2 or 3 times a year. And every time it breaks, it takes 10, 15 minutes to fix it. So that's what, half an hour a year, give or take. Now, you could build an automation like to run as a script result condition that determines if the thing's broken, depending on, if you're looking for whatever this metric is. And then another script to resolve it when it fails. So say you spent a day doing that to build the 2 scripts and test them and make sure they're robust and all that kind of stuff. That it takes a day. On the basis of an 8-hour day, that means it's going to take you 16 years to get a return on investment for the time you spent doing it. So although it's doable, it might not necessarily make sense. There is a kind of mindset that says, automate or die. I don't completely agree with that. I agree to it to a huge extent, obviously, because I'm big on scripting and automation, but it doesn't make sense to do it literally every time. But on the basis that it does, some high-level things to think about. That in 2 main buckets are security and error trapping and error handling. Because scripting on 1 or a few machines is not the same when you're doing it for hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, millions. It's different gravy. So we talked about running stuff as a system. So you can install applications, you can stop and start services, you can write to HK local machine, you can do anything. It's really cool. The problem with that is that you can do anything. So you can arbitrarily delete half the kernel, you can trash most of the services, you can delete HKLN, you can cause yourself really, really bad problems at scale. So be a little bit careful with who can do what in your code. One way to limit that is with what we call role-based access control. And this is what the technician's roles are for. One of the things you can do in your technician roles is limit what your technicians can do by category of the automations. You'll have seen categories, I'm sure, when you go into your automation library and you can use it for filtering. So you can say I only want to see my patching automations. I only want to see my Linux automations. You can also use categories as a way of filtering what they can do, where they can even see them, where they can run them, where they can update them, create them, that sort of thing. So you've got a lot more control. And the other thing to bear in mind is credential management. Now, the amount of times over the years I've seen hard-coded usernames, passwords, API keys, it's never a good idea to do that. Invariably, those accounts are in that script because they've got a higher level of access than what you've got. If you start hard-coding them, then and you are under attack, potentially, say, then anyone who's got access to that script can pick up those codes and they've immediately got the keys to the kingdom. Really, really bad idea. This is what we have, what we call secure custom fields for. Okay. The idea of a secure custom field is it's a text field, but it's fully encrypted. You need to use 2FA to even see it or copy it, which is what those little icons do. They'll ask you like your fingerprint or your one-time passcode or whatever, just to be able to see them. You can pass them into scripts. Obviously, you could write them to a text file, or you could display them on the screen, both of which are bad ideas. But the idea is that you stick them in a variable and then you do whatever you need to do with it, but without actually hard coding the value into your code. From an error trapping and error handling point of view, bear in mind you'll be running these scripts remotely, not locally. When you're running them locally, you can see what they're doing, you can see if they're failing, you can stop them at any point, and then you find out what they're doing. When you're running them remotely, you wait until they've finished and then see what the results were. You can't see errors in real time, and you can't stop it failing. And even if you could, you wouldn't know anyway, because you can't see it. There's always edge cases. Always, no matter what you think you've covered, there'll be someone somewhere who has found some way of not getting around it, but a way to make it break. My favorite example of this was back at Datto, and I built something to create a GPO. And the first thing it did was delete the original copy of that GPO so that it could make sure it could write the new one successfully. And we tested it, it worked. We tested it, it worked. We beated it, and it worked with everyone. And then we released it, and it was fine for ages. Then one day there's this customer, I think it was in the Netherlands, said it's not deleting the old GPO. I was like, oh, there was some sort of failure message. I've got in front of it, and it turns out that there were 3 GPOs with the same name which is allegedly impossible and supposedly impossible. But there I was literally sitting in front of it, and it was right in front of me. So what I did then was a much higher, deeper level of engineering where I interrogate every GPO for that name, get the ID, and then delete it by ID. Right? In 99.999% of cases, it'll only ever delete one, but for this guy, it delete three. It's stuff like that. You can't possibly, foresee every possible scenario, but you can at least try and trap for what could possibly break. For anything that happens, you think, how could this go wrong? What could break? And what can I do to foresee it and deal with it? Coming back to this notion of wiping out half the kernel at scale, you do massively have the potential here for career-defining situations. So be very careful. With great power comes great responsibility. You could break every endpoint that you have like that. And that's going to cause a very, very bad day for someone. Hence, very bad things, right? You don't want to be on the receiving end of that. A couple of examples for you. Neither of which are me. Okay, I'll go to the GPO one, but that was just a bit irritating. It didn't actually break stuff. There's one guy, this is just one that I heard about, wrote a script to delete redundant AD user objects. So when someone left, it delete their user account, which is fine. The problem was when he ran it in production, it deleted all of them. So basically, you've got this domain with, I don't know how many thousands of users, none of which can do anything because everything just stops. It was massively disruptive, obviously. They managed to restore it fairly quickly, I want to say, from backup. I don't know how long fairly is, but certainly, that would have been an awkward conversation for that guy. The other one I want to talk to you about is actually a friend of mine who told me about this recently. I'm not going to name names, obviously. There was a bootloader protection application, like sort of protecting the master boot record from attack, ironically, for Windows machines. So it was doing very low level stuff. It was rewriting the master boot record. And there was a 32-bit version and a 64-bit version. And he had logic in there to say, if you're a 32-bit machine, do the 32-bit version. If you're a 64-bit machine, 64-bit version, right? Worked out fine in testing. Deployed it into production, right? Fortunately, he thought I'd do it in chunks and I'll start with A, right? So he rolled it out to the whole of his customers that began with A. For whatever reason, the detection logic failed and it installed the 32-bit version on every machine. And given that nearly all of them were 64-bit machines, he had hundreds of machines across multiple customers, immediately going to blue screen and then going to boot loops. Couldn't get onto them on his RMM because they hadn't come up. So he's got teams of engineers running around these different sites with USB sticks with recovery media to fix each device individually. Now, fortunately, it was only A. Had it been all of them, it could have been absolutely catastrophic. But yeah, it's stuff like that. You really do have the potential to cause stuff.
We actually, John, I'll pause there for a second and for a couple of things. So, we have from Kevin here. He mentioned something that was available in Datto, and I'm wondering how it can be available in Ninja. He's wondering, in terms of limiting impact and having some precautions, role-based access, that sort of thing. How can we stop engineers from being able to run a script for customer 1 accidentally on customer 2?
That's a great question, and that comes back to I'm not sure if you're talking about RBAC here, insofar as you only want certain engineers to be able to see customer 1 scripts versus customer 2 scripts. The other way I would do it is to put some sort of logic in there to ensure there's going to be some identifier, be it a domain, be it part of the host name, I would imagine, or even sort of public IP address or something. There'll be a way to identify the customer that these machines are for, and you can say if you fail this test, then immediately exit.
So those, if I heard that right, the two approaches would be basically editing the admin portal part of it, and restricting what certain technicians are able to see, get access to, what scripts they're able to run. And the other path is then making actually changes within the script itself to try to make it restrictive, so what it's going to actually run on.
Exactly, that's exactly it. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And John, too, just a FYI with the feedback in the chat here. hoping that in some cases you can slow down speaking just a little bit.
Yeah, no problem. If it's any consolation, I'm actually speaking slower than I do normally because I slow down a little bit when I present. But yeah, that's absolutely fine and understood. We will do.
Awesome.
Okay.
Okay, and then Kevin has a follow-up. How about software installs? So I'm guessing a similar thing. You know, how can he control more what software is able to be installed on a certain customer versus another?
Yeah, I'd imagine something like that. So in that situation, you wouldn't be able to do that specifically with a application installation automation because it doesn't know how to do that. What you could do is daisy chain it, as you've seen before, where you can have these sequences of automations running. So you can have one that does some kind of sanity check to make sure that the device it's running on is valid. And then if it passes that, then drops down to the actual software install piece. Do it that way.
Makes sense.
Okay. So one thing I want to talk about quickly before we go into the demo, a quick word on Gen AI. Now, the automation specialist course that I wrote last year, there's an assessment at the end of that where you need to put in 5 solutions to 5 different scenarios. They're all graded by hand because there's more than one way to do all of them. Okay, so we didn't want to try and automate that. You can immediately tell when code has been written by Gen AI, immediately, without giving away too many tells. But what I would say is Gen AI is not actual intelligence, it's not artificial intelligence, it's not any intelligence. It's essentially a probability machine. And it works out from huge amounts of data what the next likely word is in a sequence. It's not actually thinking like a coder. It's not actually being analytical or working out a problem. It's literally saying, what's the next likely thing to put here? So don't blindly trust it. Now, I use Gen AI. I use Gen AI to say, in this situation, I'm trying to solve this, little code blocks of like maybe 5 or 10 lines, or what does this syntax mean? This really sort of deep bash syntax, because you get a lot of that. And you try and ask Google, and it strips all the characters away, so you can't actually ask it anything. But when I get something, I'm like, okay, so that's really clever. How does that work? And try and work it out. And if I can't, I'll reprompt it. What does this bit do? What does this bit do? Because it's interesting. What you shouldn't do is just let it spit out a whole bunch of code and say, there you go, and stick that into production, which I see over and over again. For anything you can do, you need to test, as I've said. Make sure it's going to work before you deploy it into production. You have the potential to break things at scale. Don't just blindly trust what it spits out because it spat it out. In fact, on the contrary, be more skeptical about it. Whatever you see, treat it as if you'd done it yourself. It's generated it like that, so it saves you a bunch of time. But treat it like your own code. Analyze it, scrutinize it, understand it, and more specifically, test it. You can't support what you don't understand, and you shouldn't be deploying what you can't support. So if you don't get it, don't deploy it, because you're going to have to support it. Without naming names, I have seen some other RMM solutions with generative AI scripting engines in them. And you ask it this question, you prompt it, and it literally just drops the code directly into the scripting pane. And the temptation there is not only to not look at it, but not even test it or investigate it. It's literally save, deploy in 2 clicks, which is potentially the worst thing you can do. If it's going to break something, it's going to break something at scale. We've given you a couple of examples of how that could play out. So just be a little bit careful. Jonathan, before I go into the products, is there any more questions at this stage?
I'll use that as a prompt for the audience too. If you have any more questions, definitely toss them in the chat, please. John, I did want to ask about the testing component of it. Are there any kind of initial best practices, specifically with using Ninja, that you would advise people? Obviously, having certain smaller groups of test devices that you roll things out on first, phased deployment on things. But any other kind of general best practices to make sure that you uncover the surprises on a smaller, more manageable group first.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, so obviously thing one is test on a lab environment that you've got direct access to. So you can see what it's doing, interactively. You can see what it's doing. You can put breakpoints in. You can, control what it's doing, control the flow, check variables should be what they are when they should be, that kind of thing. When you get to the point of deploying remote machines, at that stage you lose that level of control. So you can't see variable values at any given point. You can't put breakpoints on at any given point. But what you can do is simulate it. So what I do when I'm writing, especially when I'm writing more complex scripts, is at any given point where I'm assuming a variable contains a certain value, is I write it. I put it in the output. Variable blah is whatever it is. And then as you go through the output at the end of the script, where you can say, yeah, that's right. Oh, hang on. Why is that there then? That shouldn't be that yet. And then work out, sort of backtrack from there, why it got that value at that point, because it shouldn't have done. Another thing you could do, obviously, is just drop exit commands arbitrarily partway through to make sure at any given point it does what it should do at that point, but then stops. So it doesn't get to the stage where it could do something that's going to damage anything. When you're happy, test on a couple of machines it's designed for, because you want to make sure it works. But then test on machines it's not designed for. Test it on, try and run a Linux script on a Windows box. Try and run PowerShell on Linux. Try and run it on a really slow machine that's going to fail. Well, not fail, but have a performance issue and run it much more slowly. What impact is that going to have on the end user? Is it going to make the machine lock for 30 seconds while it's running? What variables have you got? What happens when they're wrong? If you assume variable values are going to be A, B, C, or D, and someone puts in, a curly brace, what does that do? Stuff like that. Expect the unexpected. Assume best intentions, but issues and errors. People are people. People make mistakes. The wrong scripts are going to go on the wrong endpoints. The wrong variable values are going to go in to the variable value fields. All that sort of stuff. Assume, at any given point, think what could possibly go wrong and account for it. Does that help?
Use your imagination. Yes.
Yeah. Exactly.
I like this. I like this quote too from Ben.
Yeah, I like that. I like that.
I did want to bring in one. Oh, sorry. I did want to bring in one other. Not so much a question, although I think we can kind of treat it as such. This is again from Ben. Custom field conditions that track against date time custom fields don't have a way to fire a condition from a relative date time. Example, custom field is older than end days, and he's basically just saying, hey, that would be awesome. And so that's something that we can absolutely put on product board and get on the product team's radar if it's not already, which I bet it is. But do you have any ideas here, John, around working around this?
What I would do is convert the date time value into an epoch, which is it's more of a Linux thing, but you can get it from PowerShell as well. Epoch time is the number of seconds that have elapsed since the 1st of January 1970. And it's universal. It's been a Linux thing for decades. It's actually been, PowerShell picked it up when that was written. But essentially, if you've got any kind of date time value, you can convert that to epoch, convert your relative time to another epoch, and then compare the two. That's
Very
what I
nice. All right, great. Thank you for that.
I like that. Does that answer your question, Coffee Bean Ben?
Sure. Listen to Ben. But yeah, thank you, John. I think let's check out this demo that you got.
Okay, awesome. So the automation library, you go into admin, library, automation. Now we've got hundreds in here. This is all the stuff that's been built up over time. But the native automations are the ones that come out of the box. So there's 77 of those immediately available to use. Within the template library, this is one we keep adding to more. There's over 300. So like I said, there's about 400 between the two. This is a great place to learn, actually. The way you import these is you literally just click on them. So get that guy. And then you can interrogate the code, you can explore, see how we've built it, check the variable values, set defaults if you want. But specifically, you'll find that the way we produce stuff in Ninja is designed to be bomb-proof. It's designed to be as robust as it can be. This code runs on millions of endpoints globally. We need to expect the unexpected, as it were. Anything that can be caught is caught. All this sort of stuff. Having been through the process of getting code released into the template library, I know how vigorous it is. And peer review here is brutal. I'll tell you that now. But the point is that you get really robust code, and it's great to learn from. Absolutely great to learn from. But just to get it into your template, into your automation library, you literally just click on it and then import. That's literally it. And that'll make it available to you. To create a new one, literally add automation, new script. Give it a name, give it a description, categories, as we mentioned earlier. What language you want to use, and that will then dictate. So for Windows, we've got Batch, JavaScript, VB and PowerShell, and then for Windows, for Mac and Linux, we've got Shell. If I go into PowerShell and then can select Windows, architecture 3264, both running under system account, logged in user, preferred local admin, preferred domain admin for Windows. You can obviously change those when you actually run the thing though. Variable values, parameters, and then the code block itself. To run your automations, the quickest way, like I said to you before, you go into your devices list, select one or more. Got these guys. You can run automation script. And then it will give you your list of whatever automations. I mean, it's gone from 500 something to 400 something, because these are all the Windows scripts. It automatically filters out the ones that can't be run on devices that aren't in scope. At device level, literally just click on the one icon. At scale and repetitively, if you go into one of your policies, then in here you've got these scheduled automations. Now you can build one out, give it a name, the schedule, daily, weekly, monthly, run once at some point, run once now, every minute, every hour, or on startup or login. You can add, I'm just going to click some at random, have multiple automations running in sequence, and then change the order that they run in. Very similar to scheduled automations is this notion of tasks. Okay, you'll see that it's very similar insofar as the repeating and the scheduling, the automations list. You can build out the same kind of list and same kind of sequence. The difference here is you've got a lot more granular control over the targeting. Groups, yeah, without groups. So in here we can target by organization, by individual devices, or device groups. There's a lot more flexibility there. For the ones you may not have thought about, pre and post backup. So pre-backup on a script, you can choose one or choose several. Actually, you can daisy chain these, but also you can cancel the backup if one of them fails. OS patching, exactly the same. Can run a pre-patch automation and make it cancel if it fails. For the system tray, for your users, general and SysTray, go to what I think that one's got a good example. This guy, go to the menu, and yeah, this is it. So you can see here we've got a bunch of other stuff as well. You can add all sorts of things, automations, email addresses. You can launch stuff, but in this scenario, in this environment, we've got a few automations here. These are running under the system account, even though the user doesn't have local admin rights. That's the point. And you can daisy chain them, and they can run entire workflows with one click without needing to call a help desk, and without elevation. The credentials exchange that I wanted to show you. I'm not sure which one of these will have one. I'll check that. I think that does. I'm not sure. Yeah, we go. Excellent. So you've got a bunch of credentials in here. To create a new one, just simply add credential, username and password. You'll be using a few automations, I'd imagine. Name for your credential. That's not the actual user's name. Domain. That's username goes there, and then password and confirm. Once you've got those saved, you can then set your defaults over here. For conditions, that's one of these guys. So, device has not rebooted in 30 days. You could add something like display a pop-up, which you can configure to allow the user to reboot their machine, or you can control a reboot, something like that. But at a basic level, like I said, you could have a disk space condition fire and automatically delete temporary files. You can also create a script result condition. And the evaluation script, like I said, is literally any script in your library. We've got, in several hundred here. So you can interrogate any metric, you can look for any condition, you can look for any situation. And as long as the exit code and the exit message match with the way you've configured this guy, it'll automatically fire. And just like any other condition, you can still add automations in resolution. And the other one is custom fields. So depending on what custom fields you have, so this is going to be a phone number, so that's just a text file. What we've got on here, that's a multi-line, so that's going to be contains, doesn't contain, equals, doesn't equal. I'm trying to put a checkbox. Yeah, there we go. So you've got a checkbox. So you've got the box either checked or not checked, and that will then fire your condition. But because you can write those in scripts, you can populate those custom fields however you want, and then have this guy pick them up. Back to the automation library. Automation. So you've seen here categories, so you can sort by various different categories. We've filtered 500 something scripts down to 9 because they're the only ones in the custom field category. Everyone uses custom categories in that context. You create them just by going to categories, create category, and you literally just type the name. But with RBAC, with role-based access control, you create a technician role. In the automation library section here, enable that. And then you can set default access to whatever you want to set it to, right? For level 1s, it'll probably be 0, but no access at all. But then per category, there were a couple of random scripts. Palooza, do you remember that, Jonathan? You can set default, sort of override default for these categories. And then you can select some other categories and override defaults for those. So what you've got then is you've got this list of different categories with different levels of access for this technician role. And obviously, because you can mix and match them and layer them, so you can build out quite a granular level of control for your technicians for that. Okay, go back to the deck. So to summarise, we've covered quite a lot actually today. We've looked at automation script workflows, running scripts ad hoc on demand, in policy automations, in scheduled tasks, and before and after backup, before and after patching, and in a system tray. Looked at the credentials exchange for different run as credentials for different scripts, so you can run something on a domain controller as domain admin without anyone being logged on. We've used automations to resolve conditions and to drive conditions with script result conditions and custom fields. And we've looked at some things to bear in mind when you're building your own code, so particularly around security, around error trapping, with device level privileges, RBAC, secure custom fields, and the real-time monitoring of scripts and that kind of thing. So before we close out, what other questions do we have, Jonathan?
Yeah, let's see. Let's use that as a prompt for everybody. Again, you've got John captive here for another 5 to 8 minutes. So take advantage. Any questions you have about anything that John covered, anything that he didn't cover that's on your mind in terms of scripting and automation, now is your chance. And while you're thinking about that, I'm going to do my thing, and I'm going to plug a couple of upcoming events that we've got. And so a couple of things. The first, the most timely one is it's March, and John, I don't believe they have March Madness, or I don't know how far that goes across the pond, but March Madness, the NCAA tournament, it's bracket time. We all like to have a good bracket, right? And so a couple of years ago, we launched a scripting contest. So we had a March Scripting Madness, and we've decided to launch that again. And so I wanted to share my screen here and call this out that you have a chance to enter. You've got until Sunday, March 15th. So time is short, but if you have any scripts that you've been working on, and you've perhaps shared it. I think one of the parameters here is that it should be something you've created in the past year. But if you have something, you can go into our Discord. If you're not a member of the Discord, we can pop a link here in the chat to join that. And you can go to our contest channels, and you'll see that we're giving away for the top winner the Enterprise Lego set, which is really freaking sweet. The disc actually, the top part does come off. Anyway, we're also giving away other prizes to the 16 finalists, and then the final 4, we're going to be giving away some credits to the NinjaOne swag store. So again, to enter, just go to Discord, pop in your scripts. You'll see people have been dropping in some scripts that they've developed, which is really cool, right? A lot of what I love about the NinjaOne community is that everyone's working on things, sharing solutions. So if you have something, a solve or a script that has worked well for you, we don't just sit on it, share it with the community. It can help everybody. And then likewise, folks will do the same. So definitely take advantage of that. And then I've got one other thing to share, and that is we have backups and bandwidth coming back again. John, March 31st is, I'm sure, one of your favorite days of the year. It's World Backup Day. Of course you knew that. You had that.
Oh, yeah.
And so we're going to be celebrating with another a session of backups and bandwidth. And here I'll share with you what that's all about. We've done this a few times now. It's always been a lot of fun. Basically, it's designed. It's a D&D inspired tabletop session. We're gonna have a dungeon master, and we're gonna have some guest players who are gonna be going through a backup, disaster, and recovery scenario. And by signing up to register to attend that on March 31st, you'll be entered to win another Lego set that has been rumored and announced, and it's not going to be out until technically June, but we're going to make sure that you get one. It's the Minas Tirith. I don't know if you're a Lord of the Rings fan, John, but this is a big set that nerds will be particularly excited about.
Awesome.
Yep. So lots of things going on. With all that, let's see. Yeah, we had Mark chiming in. Will you write a script that will send me money? Um,
I'm not quite sure how to respond to that. Probably, but not something I could broadcast, obviously.
all right. Well, here we got a couple minutes left. Let's hit these two. There's two other good ones. Okay. JT K Mix. It says for those permission controls, does it go off their principal or least privilege? I'm kind of
Not
trying to
sure
think
what
about this.
their principle is. Can you share my screen a second, please, John?
Yeah, absolutely.
What I'll do, that's a great question. Actually, something I picked up very early on. So if I just go here, if you go to create a new role, it depends on which way you want to do it. Now, for me, I'm a massive proponent of least privileges. So I would start at 0 and work upwards. And if it turns out you haven't given someone something, then they'll complain and you can add it to them. The opposite is also available, where you start with everything and work backwards. But the problem with that is if you miss something, no one will tell you because they'll just have more than they should. But yes, you can start least privilege with a blank template and then literally just add as you need to.
All right.
Does that answer your question? I'm not sure because that's not specifically for automations. For automations, particularly, what I would do here, as I said earlier, if you do a default with nothing, and then you override per category with the level of access you want for that category for this role, you can start with nothing, run only, view and run, and then view run update is also create. So view run update create, and then also delete. That's how I would manage that. But yeah, absolutely least privilege.
All right, perfect. And we got one more from Ben again. This is and this is a great one. Thank you, Ben. What is the coolest example that you've seen for utilizing a custom field condition to trigger additional automation?
A custom field condition, not sure on that one, but like I said, I think the VMware story that I told you earlier, where we use custom fields to decide whether or not to even snapshot the devices in the first place, and then custom fields again to decide whether or not we're going to patch those machines. I thought that was a pretty cool workflow.
All right, awesome. Well, John, thank you so much for your time, and thank you everybody for joining us for another live stream. Stay tuned. Yes.
I was just going to say before we go, shameless plug from my side now.
Yes.
Is a couple of things to mention. Is firstly, for those of you based in London in the UK, I'll be presenting on scripting with AI at the ITX Rise event in London next Thursday, literally this time next week. There's a QR code on screen if you fancy joining that for the registration link. And then the other thing was, as Jonathan alluded to earlier, with the NinjaOne Academy, we have this certified automation specialist course, which goes a lot deeper into scripting specifically for Ninja. So reading and writing custom fields, reading and writing device tags, how to use variables and parameters and various other things. So yeah, if you want to go down that rabbit hole, there's a whole bunch of content there that will keep you entertained.
Yeah, John, actually, I'm so glad that you brought both those things up, and especially this one. How did folks get access to this? Because I know for a while, Academy, we launched it. I think people had to talk with their AMs for a little while.
Yep.
What's the best way for people to find this now?
Yeah, that's still the case. So basically, your account manager will be able to enable the Academy for your account. Once that's done, all you need to do, I hope it's enabled on this account, is go to the question mark icon in your NinjaOne web app. Yeah, there it is. And then go straight down into the Academy. And that will automatically authenticate you in using your Ninja account. And your courses will be in there. So if I go in there now, hopefully, accept that. Yep, fine. And there's a certified technician, certified automation specialist.
That's perfect. And we were just talking actually before the call that there's more on the way too. So yeah, great plug. John, thank you again so much for taking time to do this. Thank you everybody for joining us. And as always, stay tuned. We'll have more coming. But otherwise, we'll see you online and take care. Have a great rest of your week. Bye, everybody.
Happy